might justify entering into war as children of God even. And we might reflect upon the Old Testament scripture of thou shalt not kill and get stuck there and think, well, how can I be a soldier then? But in reality, that does not apply to us, because that's talking about murder. And what we're doing is defending ourselves and entering into a situation where people have been harmed and are threatened, and we're going to defend them. And it's long been said in the Christian community that war is love's response to a neighbor threatened by force. And what I cherish is the heroic character of those in the uniform who are willing to do this for people they don't know. And to fly across the world, step in harm's way for those men, women, and children who have long been persecuted. For example, Saddam, and during his reign, so many thousands were killed, men, women, and children, innocent people, that we are now saying enough is enough, and that if we don't do something, it's going to get worse. And so that's why we stepped up and we're willing to do this and realize this is a moral, justifiable action. And so we know when we cross a berm to do the job, we go with God.
The first deployment started out as a 6-month rotation, just as a regular intrinsic action, which is just, American forces going over and training with the Kuwaitis. And it was just lanes set up, and what they had done was taken scenarios that were probably going to be seen up in Iraq and set them up as a lane for us to run through, so we could identify, what the terrain would look like as close as possible, how the Iraqis might attack us, and then that's what they developed lanes out of. And then we drove down the lanes, executed our dismounted and mounted training. So the idea was to give us an idea of what we would see if and when we ever would deploy to Iraq, and give our soldiers a chance to say, okay, this is what the Iraqi army is going to look like, this is what they're going to fight like, and this is what we're expecting to see. It wasn't the first 2 months that we had any thoughts that we might cross the border. As tensions rose a little bit and President Bush began to lay some stipulations down and some deadlines down, it wasn't until then, and that was after about 2 months of already being there, that everybody began to get a little antsy about it. Well, are we going to go, or are we not going to go? Now, a lot of soldiers were coming up, what do you think, what do you think? And that was, that was always the big question to the senior non-commissioned officers from the soldiers, are we going to go, what do you think? So as best as I could, try to get the soldiers ready and keep them focused on training, but still let them know in the back of their head, hey, there's a good chance we're going, guys. Then that's just Sergeant Shirley's opinion, but I thought we were going. After we left New York Cabal and set out in the what they were calling the Hasty Cabal there, basically everything that focused in there training-wise was rehearsals, and one of the big ones was crossing the berm. Scared a lot of guys, because the talk was always about this giant berm, this big berm, and all these tank ditches and mines and stuff. But the realization reached up and slapped them hard when we left that Hasty Cabal and actually pulled up to the berm. Anticipation left, and fear and animal instinct, I think, took over at that point.
The 4th Surgical Team was kind of just this unique group. They were co-located with us, but they had their own commander, and they were smart, they were talented, they were fun to be around, and it kind of took your mind off of, well, we're going to go to war. I think Milden really wanted to admit that we were going to go to war. With volleyball, I think, we'd sit and we'd laugh, we'd be like, gosh, we're going to war, but, at the same time, it's a beautiful day outside, and, what else do we have to do right now except wait for the war? But it was nice to see somebody enjoying the weather.
It was very unplanned, but it was very spontaneous. That when we got the word that we were going to move out of attack position raiders right outside of Camp Pennsylvania, and I turned to my driver Henry, and I'd carried 2 American flags with me, and I said, hey, go put American flag up on our antenna. So he put it up, and literally within minutes, they were everywhere. And it was almost like being at a ball game, and everybody was flying their school colors. But it made you feel good, and I mean, first of all, everybody had thought about bringing an American flag, and the second is that to see them all flying really made you feel proud. We actually, I guess we kept them up until we got ready to cross the berm. And that's when we took them down. But it was great. I mean, it really brought everybody's morale up. So we divided the 1,200 vehicles across 3 large march units. We crossed the berm around 8 o'clock in the morning. Really and truly, it was a pretty permissive crossing, other than the initial contact that our guys had. Very little initial contact, which of course we're thankful for, but might have put some folks, early on maybe into a little false sense of security that this was going to be a walk in the park, in which it wasn't. We came over a hill, and that's when we noticed that there was movement out in front of us, about 150 meters from us. That's when I called on the radio that we had contact, because we didn't know exactly what it was. It was 2 figures, and they darted and they went back in some shrub. We spread out. At that time, I noticed there were sheep in the area, so we thought that they may have been civilians. And as we walked up on it, we noticed there were 2 little girls that were out there tending to their sheep, literally in the middle of nowhere. But it really made you think, about the rules of engagement, that you just couldn't be freewheeling out there. So, or we might have accidentally, shot 2 innocent folks out there for no reason other than tending sheep. So it really showed me the true discipline of our soldiers immediately, right off the bat. The division was moving so fast, and of course we were carrying, and 3rd FSB was carrying basically all the fuel for the entire 3rd Infantry Division, and at that point, probably for the Corps. We had about 140 5,000-gallon fuel tankers with us. We had split out fuel tankers to support 2-7 Infantry's attack and 369, Task Force 369's attack. So we had those fuel trucks out, and we got a call early that morning, just about daylight after we conducted our refuel, that to bring all the fuel trucks forward, and they were going to push them up the road ahead of us. The key at that point was, in order to sustain the momentum of the attack, we had to have gas for the tanks. Our brigade, 1st Brigade's movement plan was very strict, and for how vehicles sequenced in through the traffic control point, because they had the whole brigade combat team and other Corps units were moving with us. So not every unit could get onto the road at the same time. And we were supposed to travel that hardball highway up until it changed into a 2-lane road up near Al-Nazariya. And we were on the right road, but every unit seemed to be wanting to try to go up the same route. Units that were ahead of us that were not 3ID units, or Corps units, Corps and higher units, had pulled off on the side of the road and gone to sleep. We'd taken a rest, so that kept backing the road up, till finally we couldn't move anymore until daylight the next day. It was a huge parking lot, is what it came to. And then as it became daylight and units realized that they couldn't move, or they were out of sequence, then we were able to move ahead. And as we started moving up toward the road where it changed to ASR Jackson in Al-Nazariya, we did pause for a second and let a Marine battalion, the same Marine battalion that lost a soldier earlier to an accident, let them move ahead of us, because there was enemy contact up in Al-Nazariya. So we let them pass in front of us, where they could get some Marine combat power up to Al-Nazariya, and we fell in right behind them. And then once we got to Al-Nazariya, we made a left and headed up toward Asamawa. And as we were traveling up to Asamawa, that's when we first started encountering the masses of civilians that were moving out on the road. So, of course, the rules of engagement were clear. We didn't treat them as hostile unless they committed a hostile act. But as we know that now hindsight looking, that there was probably some unfriendlies, intermixed in them. But there were just masses of people, coming out on the road waving, and and we had to keep them back. Every time we stopped, they'd try to get up close to the vehicles to ask for food or water, or just because they were curious. So every stop became a combat mission. And that was, we had to stop out, get security, push security out 10 meters or so away from the vehicles. So it was constant that whole day, because it mattered not where we were, there were these civilians. And we finally moved up the road until we got close to Osamawa, and that's when they closed off Osamawa because there was heavy enemy contact up that road. And it was that time that we were just about out of fuel again, so we had to get those 1,200 vehicles, off the side of the road again and refuel. As we got ready to go up to the escarpment, through the traffic control point there, which they had actually established, that's where you can count on our first sandstorm. We moved up the escarpment fairly easily, but again, as they were sequencing us through the traffic control point, since they had enemy contact, those mortar rounds being shot at us, they stopped our other unit from joining us. So we were then separated not only by distance, but by time, because we couldn't stop and wait on them. We had to continue to move through where the other units could. So actually we moved through the escarpment, through rams, then we went to our objective area, which was raiders. And that's where we spent the first night that we didn't have everybody together, in some sense. But yeah, that night we had the farmhouse. We had to keep eyes on them because they were flying the black flag, which is the Ba'ath Party symbol. We knew that they weren't friendly to the U.S. and we went back up to Redcom 1, which is everybody in their vehicle, weapons locked, loaded, ready to roll. And we didn't get a lot of sleep. We didn't get a lot of sleep for 21 days. So we started getting a little bit of high winds and everything, and then in matters of minutes, the world turned orange, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I remember it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you couldn't see outside. So I had my driver, Specialist Henry, break out our night vision goggles, and we put on our night vision goggles at 2 o'clock in the afternoon just to be able to see. And it was also that night that we took our first Iraqi casualties. And so in the worst part of the storm, when the whole world is turning orange, is when we were first put to the test on our medical side. And it was Iraqis who'd been shot up pretty bad, and we had to bring them in. And that was our first time our forward surgical team actually started operating, was that afternoon, which was like night. We couldn't see. It all had a huge impact on everybody. But again, I think it also had an impact on the Iraqis as well, because they couldn't see us.
And so we travel where the soldiers are. It's not about them coming to us necessarily to the chapel, but going out to where they are, and we travel for hours on end sometimes. And I have gone to a destination and celebrated Mass with 1 trooper, but that was worth it. I've gone there and celebrated with 50 troopers, and that's worth it. It's not so much how many are there, but that where 2 or more gathered, there Christ is. And so for us to be able to take a moment out of the busyness and the chaos of the daily activities in the war, and take a moment to have a reality check that God is continuing to walk with us.
Based off of the Soviet doctrine that the Iraqis were supposed to be using and what we saw, they were just 2 complete different things. They were not very organized. They worked in small groups of, I'd say, 10 or less. Sometimes you'd just see 2 or 3. They were dressed, some completely civilian clothes. We had some guys, honestly, he was in a t-shirt, a pair of sweatpants, and a pair of flip-flops. For lack of better words, he was attacking our Bradley head-on with an AK-47. He had an RPG strapped across his back, but he was running head-on into the Bradley. That was basically their tactics. It was a lot of suicide missions. You had 3 or 4 guys, some of them dressed in soldier uniforms, some of them in civilian clothes, driving a regular civilian vehicle. One would hang out the window of a car and fire an RPG round at you. After most of the BMPs were destroyed and the tanks were destroyed, that was the primary vehicle they were going to fight out of in Baghdad. In the actual part of Baghdad and the surrounding areas, tanks and APCs were not the weapon of choice for those guys. It was these little technical vehicles, because it did 2 things. It had firepower, it had quick mobility, and it disguised itself as a civilian vehicle unless you stopped and paid real close attention to what it was. because vehicle driving straight at you, you have to sit there and stare at it for a minute. And there's, we hated to do that pause because, after you get hit by a couple RPG rounds inside your Bradley, you don't want to pause no more. But we had to actually stop and say, wow, is that a civilian truck or is that one of those tech vehicles?
We went up there, and Colonel Grimsley had gathered all the commanders and said, hey, we just got the word that we're a go to go across the Kabbalah Gap. We're going to press the attack to Baghdad, and we move out the next morning. Gave out some quick guidance to us, and we pushed up what we called a flea forward logistics element, and because we had to sustain the momentum of the attack through the Kabbalah Gap, and the only way to do that was to move some critical fuel and some medical and a little bit of supply that we had, move them up, and that's what we did. We moved up a large element up and tucked it right up in behind the lead task forces, 2-7, and then we got the word to LD. It was at about 0400 the next morning was when we were supposed to LD, and we moved up. We went up to our place where we were supposed to cross an oil pipe. And as soon as we did this, the second or third vehicle through was 5,000-gallon tanker got stuck, and we had to call the engineers forward to dig us out. And somebody said, "Do you smell onions?" And everybody said, "Yeah, I do smell onions." At that point, we realized we're in somebody's onion field, somebody's garden that we were in, and at that point we knew we had Iraqi civilians right around us. At that point, we were literally praying for daylight to come, because we not only where we could see, but where we could figure out how to dig ourselves out. And once we dug ourselves out and we got moving again up toward the Kabbalah Gap, that's when we took our second indirect fire that came in at us, and that came from they had these sniper mortar teams. So again, we were at a heightened state of readiness, but they did manage to get off one round or one or two rounds to us. It hit pretty close, and we're just fortunate, by the grace of God, it didn't hit us. But that was our second encounter. But then we moved through the Kabbalah Gap pretty quickly, and then we kicked out another flea. We set up at PA Wilcox, and we were supporting the attack toward Objective Peach, which is the Euphrates River.
I don't speak Arabic, but I was determined to speak something to them, be they EPWs or refugees, the children in the street, whatever the case. So I learned one phrase the whole war, and it served me well, and Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. And whether it was that belligerent EPW that's being cared for medically, or perhaps children in the street, or consoling a woman who's experienced the hardship of war, there now having herself cared for at the MASH unit, to say Salam Alaikum opens doors, as well as a smile, as well as a pat on the back. It's letting them know that we're not here just as war fighters to take out the bad guys, but to also help them rebuild their lives. And of course, we were called to do the difficult thing sometimes, and that is, as a Catholic priest, to provide last rites. When a soldier is seriously wounded, a soldier is dying, that we, through our Catholic tradition, extend to them the holy anointing, that they might receive strength from God to continue in their journey.
We rolled into the Five Corners area, and that morning was really quiet, early in the morning. I walked over to Sergeant Ward and them, and I was talking to them. That's some of my buddies, Sergeant Teasley and Sergeant Ward. They're all the dismounted squad leaders. We were just talking about, what he wanted to do for security and stuff. And then they busted out MREs. We're going to eat breakfast, and we were just talking. I go, hey, we got to get a picture by the sign there, the Saddam International Airport. And he goes, yeah, we'll have to do that. This was easier than we thought. And all of a sudden, right then, an RPG flies right over our head and explodes like a couple of meters behind us, And it was just like, whoa, was that what I think it was? And then all of a sudden, crack, 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 crack. I was like, yep, that's what it was, And right after that, they came across the net. They needed, a squad to move down and secure a roadblock procedure. There was a SPIC tank moving in our direction that way. So they loaded us up and we rolled out. And as we moved down the road, you know, there was a bunker. We threw a grenade in the bunker and blew it up and kept on going. And the road kind of curved around this other building here. So as we're walking down the road, you know, kind of, you know, scurrying to the side, you know, staying to the wood line, and all of a sudden my point man spotted the first tank. And as I noticed that tank, our tank, comes screaming around and just whips right in front of these tanks and screams out into this field, spins around. He's got a tank behind him, you know. He's towing another tank. And all of a sudden I see the guy, the Iraqis are pointing at our tank and everything. The first lead guy was. And he's looking over his left shoulder at the guy behind him. And I just pulled up my M4 and I have a scope on it. And I put 3 rounds in his side. And you could see his barrel of his tank kind of drop like that, you know. I killed him and he fell into this hatch. So I turned to the second gunner and I started firing at him. And I loaded like a whole magazine on that tank. And you hear the ping, 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 ping. So oh damn, man, I didn't get him, you know, because I was trying to get both. But, you know, ran across the road and I'm yelling at the lieutenant, there's 2 tanks, 2 tanks. And he goes, "Hi, Roger, I copy 2 tanks. And right then the machine guns just spraying across the ground, you know, right around me and everything. So the guys are all going, oh damn, Sergeant Rob's going to get nailed out there. And my point guy, he saw the tank traverse its turret at me. And he goes, hey, he's traversing his turret, Sergeant. And right then I hear this loud explosion as I'm turning to go back to my guys, and I see this thing hit the ground in front of me. And I just turned, and the guy said this big old black thing flew right by me. And all I saw was smoke and debris. And I come walking through the smoke, and they said, man, it looked like John Wayne coming through that thing, man. It was bad as hell. So after that, you know, both tanks got nailed right then. It was in rapid succession. He just took them both out. The secondary explosions inside them, they were just exploding for like an hour. You know, we would see a round go shooting off at us, you know, and everything. You know, it was wild, man. It was pretty intense.
The first couple convoys, and I think this was true for every convoy going from that side of the river to the airport, probably even until we got to the Olympic Stadium. Colonel Tyree, every time he briefed somebody, said it's not if we get attacked, it's a matter of when we get attacked. You know, because I mean, really, that first night when we moved, you know, we were listening to the radio, you know, of people getting attacked on the way up. I mean, you know, my medics were 369 armor. I mean, not 6 or 8 hours earlier, you know, they were getting shot at in the same road we took, you know, and that was daytime. So, I mean, I can talk about the artillery rounds I heard, I can talk about the bullets that I heard, but, you know, I've got soldiers who, you know, Specialist Brown has a, you know, piece of shrapnel that ended up in his sleeping bag. I've got soldiers that, you know, did have holes in their vehicles, you know, and I've gotten lucky where, you know, there are no holes in my vehicles. I've had no near misses or anything, you know. I don't know how close or not close anything was, but, you know, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, 1st Brigade was pretty far up there, you know. I was in the airport, you know, before a heck of a lot of the people were. You know, and people were getting attacked on that same route, you know, the day after I drove that route. And, you know, we drove in the middle of the night, 10 hours, you know, and I, you know, stopped alongside of the road and I couldn't see anything. And, you know, I'm surprised I'm surprised I survived that trip.
We rolled out. We actually had some downtime the next night, you know. They actually relieved us by that evening. And we rolled out to the airport and went into these little sheds and stuff that Stalin used to, all this stuff fly, you know, he imported in and everything. So we had all these nice beds and stuff in there, and nice rugs and stuff. So we got some rugs and stuff that we needed to cushion our, you know, beds and stuff. And actually it worked out real well for us because later on we didn't have any, you know, place to sleep. So we could lay down one of those rugs, you know. We just rolled them up and stuck them on the Bradleys on the side. So, yeah, the Colonel got kind of mad about that. He was a little upset about that. Went off on us about, you know, yeah, I didn't feel too bad. I thought Saddam owed us that, you know. So we went to a outer area. You know, they took us out to the outer area by the airport, and it was like a rich neighborhood. You know, there was a lot of nice houses. So we had to go through and clear all these houses out. You know, make sure there was nothing in there, no bad guys or anything like that. So, you know, we're breaking into these houses thinking, you know, maybe they locked it and then they snuck in through another way, you know, we're going to snipe us later. So, you know, you go up on the roof and everything. They're nice places, you know, all marble floors and, You know, it was kind of cool. One of our guys found some Cuban cigars and everything. And they were like, yeah. It was kind of a bummer. We found some like 20-year-old scotch and stuff like that. I was like, man, because we were under strict rules. Don't mess with alcohol or nothing like that. So all right, man, that's cool. We'll abide by that. But the cigars went with us. A lot of the guys smoked cigars, stuff. 2-7 didn't get into the town itself, into Baghdad until after the war, and then they put us out in the town. So 2nd Brigade got to roll in ahead of us on that one. So they're all right. They got to get the glory.
We saw burns from artillerymen. We saw different head trauma. I remember talking to one of the scouts in the brigade reconnaissance troop, who, the doctors came up to me and said, yeah, this guy, he really needs, go see an optometrist, but he wants to get back to the line, he doesn't want to evacuate it. So, I went over and talked to the guy. I'm like, look, I understand where you're coming from. And there were a lot of guys like that. I mean, we had a good example is Major Coffey and Colonel Marcone. Colonel Marcone, who I joked that, he got hit with a mortar round right on his Kevlar. He came to see us, we talked about trying to get him an MRI, but I mean, if we ever would have mentioned him going anywhere, outside the brigade area, we would have never seen him again. And, in our hospital, same thing with Major Coffey. He had shrapnel in his leg, came and we tested it up, and he left and went back to his unit. A lot of people, they just want to know when they can get back, and so.
The days seem like years. It's just, and I can remember them all so well too. I can't remember when every minute seemed so important. You come back home and you can sleep for hours and waste an entire day in there. It just seemed time was just too precious.
The other interesting thing, especially once we got to the airport, was we started seeing a lot of Iraqi civilians coming in that had a very, very American look to them. Clothing, haircut, everything. And the first time I saw one of them, I said, if you put this guy in BDUs, or you put this guy in America, I wouldn't think twice about him growing up in New York or Miami or anywhere else, because they truthfully looked American.
I was just floored at how extravagant and elegant these houses were. And then you drive down the street and you look at what the civilians were living in, and they're living in, mud walls and dirt floors. And how could this man have such nice things for his immediate family and his immediate friends, and then treat his people that way? When we moved into our compound that they gave us, which was actually houses that belonged to government officials, high-ranking generals, the house that my platoon was put in had no doors, no windows, the carpet was pulled up, all the sinks, all the toilets, all the light switches, everything was missing. The only thing they didn't take was the walls and the marble floors, because they couldn't get them up. For that to happen, I actually was happy for the people. Now, I was like, well, it'd be nice to have these comforts, but I was happy that the people got something back from Saddam Hussein, because he was taking their money and their blood and building these big fancy houses, because it was a 3-story house they gave us. And this was just a house for one person. But they all had in-ground swimming pools, and so these people were living high in the hollow in the blood of these poor civilians. So for that to happen, I got a little chuckle out of. But for them stealing the stuff from the museum and robbing the banks and robbing fruit stands and bread stands and other people's homes, that for us was wrong, because they were causing problems amongst their own people, and looting became a big problem when it reached that scale. So for us, we needed to stop it at all costs and get it under control, and that meant picking up patrols, protecting the neighborhoods better, working with the civilians to create their own neighborhood watch. So we started trying to establish a lot of that to keep the looting from happening, because it just got so far out of control, they were killing each other over it. Oddly enough, everyone talked about this war was based around oil. I don't think this war was based around oil. It was based around a terrorist threat, and for the Iraqi people, they didn't care what it was based around. The Iraqi people wanted to be free, and you know, they're free now, which is a great thing. That country needs to be free. I lost a good friend of mine, Sergeant Marshall was the scout platoon sergeant, and him and I were actually pretty good friends. And you know, I hated losing that guy because when we got back from Iraq, he was retiring. He had 22 years in the service. To lose him because he was such a good friend kind of hurt, and I had a lot of anger when I found out he died, because I had just seen the man like 10 hours before that and sat there and talked to him, and it was odd because our conversation was what we were getting ready to do when we came home. And he was talking about his plans to what he was going to do when he was retired. And then like 10, 12 hours later, I found that he was dead. And he was a really good guy. And he had given 22 good years to his country. And he deserved a lot better than that. And he was a great man, and he gave the ultimate sacrifice to this country. And I just really feel sorry for his wife.